What's going on, guys? It's Cooper Codes, and in this video, we are going to be building this chatbot with the new ChatGPT API. We're going to be able to ask the chatbot questions, for example, what is an API endpoint? And then ChatGPT is going to give us a response. This project is a great introduction to anyone who wants to use this API throughout their React applications. And we can keep on asking questions just like you would in the regular ChatGPT interface. For example, we could say something like, why are API endpoints important? And it's going to keep on giving us responses. This video uses the GPT-3.5-turbo model, which is absolutely breaking news. This is 10 times cheaper than the previous GPT-3.5 models, which means that it's starting to become incredibly affordable to add AI to your React applications. We can get started by building out the front end of this application. I'm going to go to an empty folder in Visual Studio Code, and then I'm going to create our application using Vite. So I'm going to say npm create Vite at latest, then the name of our application, I'm just going to call it app, and then I'm going to say dash dash to start our parameters, and then the next parameter we want to use is dash dash template, and we are going to be using the React template. So then you can press enter. So we can cd into the application, and then npm install everything in there right now, and then I'm going to npm install another package. This is going to be at chat scope /chat-ui-kit-react. We are going to use this package to easily build out our chat interface. So you can press enter, and now we're good to go. We can go into our folder structure here, go into the source folder, and then go into app.jsx. I'm going to delete everything here and then just keep this outermost div. So just like this. We can now import some styling and components from our ChatScope library. So firstly, we're going to import at ChatScope UI-kit-react like this. And then we're going to add dash styles to the end. And we want to go into the dist folder, go into default, and then go into styles.min.css. This is going to give us the styling for our components. Now we can actually import components. To make this video simple, I'm just going to import everything we need all at the front. So I'm going to say import some object brackets there, and then from at chat UI kit react like this. We are going to need a main container, a chat container, a message list, a message input, and then finally a typing indicator. Now we can build out a component that's going to have all of our chat functionality. So we can make a div on the very outside of this component and add some styling to it. For example, its position is going to be relative, and it's going to have a height of 800 pixels and a width of 700 pixels. All of our components are going to be wrapped in this large main container, just like this. Within that main container, we are going to have a chat container for all of our chat logic. Inside of the chat container, we are going to have a message list. This is pretty much going to show all of our different messages that we have. In order to store our messages in an array like this, we can go to the top and add some use states. For example, we can change this use state to be messages and then set messages. That's going to be an array. I'm going to initialize this with one message to show you guys what the actual objects look like. We are going to have a message property, which is the actual message itself. So hello, I am ChatGPT, and then a sender, which is just going to be ChatGPT. And so within our message list, we can go to messages.map, grab the current message that we're going over in the array, so the current object. And we can also grab the index of that certain message. And then we can render a message component by saying return message. So this is a component we imported. Its key is going to be equal to the index. And then its model, which is the message it's looking for, is going to be equal to the current message object we're looping over. Now every single message in our array will get a message component. We also want a message input to be used under this list. So at the bottom of the list, we're going to have an input for the user to input text and send messages. I'll have a placeholder, which is just going to say type message here. And then we can also do some logic here where we have an onSend event that gets hit. When the user sends a message, we want it to call a certain function. For example, I'm going to create a function right now called handle send. So we can define handle send above. I'm going to do a const syntax. So const handle send, which we're going to make an arrow syntax array. So we can say async message. So that's like saying function. And then we can point this arrow function here to some logic by adding some curly braces. And so when a message gets sent, we're going to want to create a message object. So we can say const new message is equal to. We are going to add this object into our state right here. And so the message is going to be equal to message. And so this message right here is actually some text we're getting from the input. And then the sender is going to be equal to the user. With our new message, we're going to want to do two things. We're going to want to update our messages state, and then eventually we're going to want to process message to ChatGPT. So send it over and see the response. Because we have two different spots where we're going to process these messages, I'm going to make a constant called new messages, which is going to be our new array of messages. So I'm going to make an array, then I'm going to say ... messages. This is going to take all the messages that are already in our state, so the current value of our state, and then we're going to add the new message on top. Oh, sorry, and this should be new messages. And then we're going to add the new message on top. An easy way of seeing this is all the old messages plus the new message. And so to update our messages state, we can say set messages equal to new messages. Super simple. My bad, guys, if you're following along directly. This up here doesn't have this little dash React. It should just be chat UI kit styles like this. And one more thing, when we're using this library, one thing we have to do is you have to say the direction is equal to outgoing. That means that it's going to show on the right. So it's a message that we are sending out. And so now if we npm run dev again, things are looking good. And we can see that if we type a message, we'll say, I am Cooper Codes. It's going to show up on the right. Now we're getting to the point of the tutorial that we're actually going to want to set up the ChatGPT API, but I'm going to set up a couple things before we do that, but we're really close, guys. So one cool thing we can do is before we actually start processing the message with the API, we can set a typing indicator. For example, ChatGPT is typing. We can do this by going up to the top and creating a state. So const typing and then set typing is initially going to be equal to false. So it's going to be a use state of false. When we send the request here at like line 30, we're going to have some logic here. One thing that we're going to do is we're going to initially say set typing to true, because you can imagine ChatGPT is typing or, thinking. And so when this is true, we want to show a component in our React application. So we can go down to our message list, which has a typing indicator property. Inside of here, we can say typing. If that is true, show the typing indicator element like this. And the content is going to be ChatGPT is typing. And if typing is false, we're just going to show null. So that just means nothing. So we can save this application and then see what it looks like. So we should send a message in here. So I'm just going to say hello. And then you'll see ChatGPT is going to be typing forever. Once our API request is done, we can go back and set this typing back to false because it's kind of like done typing. You'll see it's just going to run forever because we just set it to true once and we don't do anything after that. We can get started setting up the ChatGPT API by going over to platform.openai.com. You're going to want to log in like normal, go to the top right, and then press View API Keys. As you'll see, I make videos with this API, so I have a bunch of different keys. But we are going to press down here, Create New Secret Key. Once this has been generated, it's never going to show you it again. So make sure to copy it here, go over to your application, scroll up, and just say something like const API key is equal to that string right there. The API key allows us to make calls to OpenAI, and it knows that it's coming from our account. All right, guys, now we're actually going to process our current message over to ChatGPT. I'm going to create a different function for this just to kind of isolate the logic. So I'm going to say async function process message to ChatGPT. And the input is going to be the chat messages. So all the messages from our chat. And at line 33, to call this function, I'm going to say await process message to ChatGPT, and then put in the new messages right here. Make sure this is new messages and not messages. This is kind of in depth, but messages right here, our actual state that we're using, hasn't been updated with this new value yet. And so when we make this API call, we want to make sure that we're using the new messages here. And so I'm going to be using this for a reference just to explain to you guys kind of the logic behind what we're doing here. This API endpoint right here, the chat completions endpoint, is what allows us to use ChatGPT functionality. We are going to make a fetch request in JavaScript that's going to have very similar logic to this curl request right here. One important thing is that look at this messages object right here. It has a role of user and content is what is the OpenAI mission. You'll see this object here is structured differently than how our objects are structured in the front end. That means that we have to kind of translate our objects into something that OpenAI will understand. Because right now, chat messages, the input right here, has a bunch of objects that have a sender, which is either going to be user or ChatGPT. And then it has a message, which is going to be the message content here. But to send data to the API, we need to make a new API messages array. So translating these messages for our API to understand. And they need to be in the format of role, which is either going to be user or assistant. And I will talk about what those mean in a second. And then instead of message, we have to say content is equal to the message content. It's kind of annoying, but this is very common for when you have to format data for an API request. But it's actually more simple than you guys might think. We can make a let API messages be equal to an array. We can build this array by saying chat messages dot map. This allows us to go over every single chat message and create a new object with, for example, new properties like this. We can take the current message object that we're on and then make an arrow function pointing to the logic that we want to do with that message. For example, the role is very important here. So we can say let role be equal to an empty string. If the message object dot sender is equal to ChatGPT, then we want to make sure to define this role as assistant. Otherwise, we can say else define the role to be equal to the user. And then we can return an object similar to how it's expecting the content to look. So we can say that the role property is going to be equal to the role that we defined above in that let at line 41. And then the content is going to be equal to the message object dot message, which is how we initially defined our message content here. And at line 40, this should be API messages. Sorry about that, because this is actually the array that's being built up. And it's going to be an array of objects that look just like this. Now that we have the API messages here, we can now make our fetch statement. So we are going to say await fetch, and then we want to input the certain endpoint we want to talk to. For example, https://api.openai.com/v1/chat/completions. And then we can put a comma, and then we're going to make an object with all the different properties we want to specify this request. For example, its method is going to be a post because we're posting data. We're posting these messages to the API. And then we are going to have some headers here. These headers are defined right here. It wants a authorization and a application/JSON content type. Just showing you guys where I'm getting this information from. So I'm going to say authorization is equal to bearer plus API_key, which is that API key that we defined initially up here. Then I'm going to say content-type is equal to application/JSON. That means we are going to be sending JSON in the body of this request. And so the body down here is going to be JSON.stringify. And I'm going to make an API request body variable in a second here. So we can do that by going after our API messages and saying const API request body is equal to an object. The AI model that we want to use for this request is going to be gpt-3.5-turbo. And then it also wants our messages, which is pretty much all the different messages that we have in our conversation. We can do this by saying ... API messages. Because remember, this is this thing we made at line 40, which is the chat messages formatted for API. So we can say ... here. And remember, this is going to be like message 1, message 2, message 3, etc. There is one very important thing we need to discuss now, though. You see these roles right here? They're very important. There are 3 different roles. There's a user role, which means that it's a message from the user, and an assistant role, which means it's a response from ChatGPT. And then a very final important role is going to be called system. This is generally one initial message defining how we want ChatGPT to talk. So I'm going to make our system message right here, where I'm going to say const system message is equal to an object. Its role is going to be equal to system, and then its content is going to be equal to a prompt. This prompt defines how the actual language comes out of ChatGPT. For example, explain all concepts like I am 10 years old. And so you can change this content to have it display different information. At the end of the tutorial, I'll show you guys how we can switch to other things like speak like a pirate. It will literally do that. And even stuff like explain like I am a 10 years of experience software engineer. And this is pretty cool because it's giving ChatGPT context as to how you'd want it to respond. For example, if you're like a travel agency and you're trying to book people's like flights with AI or something, you could say like speak like a travel agent and be very clear about every single thing related to travel, right? And it will literally change how it talks based off that prompt, which is defined in your system here. And this is incredibly important because we're going to take this system message and put it at the front of our messages always. It's always going to be there. It's going to consistently be there no matter what. And it has to be here in this messages array in order to actually get sent over to ChatGPT correctly and respond how we'd want it to respond. All right, guys, I know this is a lot of stuff at once, but this is a lot of data management when you think about it, and we have to make sure that we work with the API exactly how it wants us to. So now the fun part is we have this fetch statement. The method's good, the headers are good, the body is good. Now we can say .then, which is going to grab some data that's going to get returned from the actual OpenAI API. Initially, I'm going to turn this data into a JSON format by saying return data.json. We can then do another .then statement, allowing us to grab the new JSON data, something we can actually process in JavaScript. And for now, I'm just going to say console.log data. All right, let's go over to our application and see this in action. And so this is assuming you have that console.log data. So just so you guys are aware of that, we can go in here and type our message. I'm going to say, what is a website? And you'll see we got the response over here, which is great news. And the actual response is going to be in the first part of this choices array. So we can go to choices, and then go to the first thing in there, and then go to message and then content. I don't know why OpenAI designed this API to where you have to do so many different things, but you know, that's on them. But we're going to have to go into this data object is what we're looking at here, and then get this content right here and then display it to our user. You'll see it says something like, hey there, a website is a place on the internet where you can find and see different things. So it actually did respond to our question of what is a website. So let's get in there and try to just console.log the data.choices, and it's in the first array of choices, and then in the message, and then in the content. So we're going to go to the first array here, .message, and then .content. And so now if we run this, we should just see a string coming from line 77. So I just refresh my application. I'm going to say, what is a programming language? And you'll see we actually have a string at line 77, which we can then show to our user as a message, which is pretty cool. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set messages so we can actually show this new message to our user. I'm going to make an array that's going to consist of two things. Initially, it's going to have all the ... chat messages that we've seen so far. And then it's going to have our new message on top of that, which I'm going to make an object like this. This new message is going to say that the message is equal to this data right here, so the actual string of our message, and that the sender is equal to ChatGPT. And guys, make sure to always be correct about how you capitalize ChatGPT here, because it's how we identify if a message is assistant or user right up here, right? So make sure that ChatGPT is always, capitalized the correct way, because it could break your system a little bit. And so now our user is able to see the response from ChatGPT. And then this is kind of subtle, but at the end, we're going to say set typing is equal to false again. Because you guys will remember, initially we set typing equal to true. And so now that we finally got the API response, we can set it back to false. All right, let's go and see this in action. So I'm going to ask, how should I learn JavaScript? It's going to type for us. And boom, it's going to give us a pretty hefty response here. You will need to understand what JavaScript is first. All right, guys, I think I should start taking notes. This is actually a pretty good response. And you can even ask it specific questions as to what it just told you, just like ChatGPT. Because we set up messages correctly, it understands the entire context of what we said. So it's actually remembered we asked, how should I learn JavaScript? And so I can even ask something specific to this prompt. For example, what specific projects are good for a developer with 2 internships? Amazing stuff. And so now we have ChatGPT fully initialized in our application. One quick thing we can do if you guys are going to put this on your portfolio or anything like that is we can go back over to our app.jsx and go down to your message list. It should be around line 93. and then set the scroll behavior equal to smooth. I don't know why it's not this behavior by default, but it's kind of choppy by default. So that's going to make things look better when you're scrolling around. And guys, just to show you the power that this initial system message has, which should be around line like 53, I'm going to say, speak like a pirate. And so we can go back over to our application and just say, what is an API endpoint? And it's going to tell us, ahoy, matey. Okay, so, if you guys don't appreciate my voice and you want to go learn from a pirate, you can do this if you want. But this actually has applications that aren't completely ridiculous, like, being a pirate. For example, explain like I'm a 10 years of experience software engineer. It's actually going to change how it explains things to us. And we can look at this. So let's go and save this. So explain like I am a 10 years of experience software engineer. Make sure to refresh your application. And I'm just going to ask, what is an API? And you'll see it actually uses different language. Look, it's talking about scalability, security, maintenance, software components. And so if we go back and say, explain like I am a 7-year-old just learning about computers. And you can be specific with these. And so I'm going to ask it the same question, what is an API? And you'll see it's not telling us about security or anything crazy. It's saying that an API is like a waiter at a restaurant. So it's completely changing how it talks based off this system prompt. All right, guys, so that is pretty much the video. Hopefully this project is a lot of fun for you guys, as it kind of lets you use an API that's completely brand new. This is honestly a great portfolio project because it showcases that you can manage data throughout React and also use an external API. So hopefully it was helpful in that regard. If you made it this far, feel free to subscribe to the channel, and thanks so much for watching.